Hello everybody, today we're gonna break down one of my latest edits. The idea behind this edit is to have another take on the Island in the Sky series, following these two. But this time I wanted to make a sunset scene, but before we start, let's look at some fun facts about this PSD. Its size is a colossal 4.1 gigabytes and it has a resolution of 4000 by 5000 pixels at 300 dpi. It has a cool 223 layers and took around 8 hours to make. But without further ado, let's get started. So the first step of pretty much any composition is the sky. This is what the whole composition will be based upon, and to build a solid house you need good foundations. So I picked this guy off Unsplash. By the way, all these stock images come from Unsplash. So after importing the sky, I made it brighter with curves, fixed it with color balance, then gradient map to mute the colors, and another curve to add a bit more contrast. Then I started working on the two mountains on each side of the image. I started with a simple shape and added texture with an image of a mountain, and corrected each one with curves. Then, to match the colors, I duplicated the sky, blurred it with Gaussian blur, and put it on top, decreased the fill and put it in color blending mode. Then curves to burn the edge, color balance to adjust the colors, and another curve to dim that area which I felt stood out too much. Then I repeated pretty much this exact process for the other mountain on the right. Then I made them quite a bit darker and added the same gradient map I used for the sky, but with a decreased fill. Now I wanted to add some fog at the bottom of the image, add a bit of detail to the mountains, and since it was gonna be covered by the bridge anyway, I just made a duplicate of the whole comp, dehazed it to -100 in camera raw, overlaid it, applied a black mask, and brushed with a low flow on the bottom of the image. I guess I just felt like doing things differently. Then I added a bit more of it with a soft brush and a low flow. And it was time to add the floating island. More of the same really. I just created the base shapes with a lasso tool and filled them with image textures. For the bottom part, I just flipped the same image I used for the mountains, and for the top part, I just used an image of a grass field. Then curves to dim it all, color balance for the top section, then a gradient map, more curves, and another gradient map. For the bridge, I added it, cut it out with the pen tool, removed that person there in the middle with content aware fill. I warped it and blurred it slightly with Gaussian blur and applied a vertical gradient to the smart filter mask to have the front of it detailed but a bit of blur as it gets further from the viewer. Now curves, color balance, more curves, and you guessed it, a gradient map. Now it was time to populate the top of the island, so I added a house, then curves, a gradient map, another blurred copy of the sky set to color blending mode and a low fill, and then color balance. I wanted to add a bit of glow to the window, so I cut out an image of a bright yellow window and masked it to fit the one of the house. Then curves to brighten it, color balance to adjust it, and to make it glow, I just brushed over it with a soft brush and decreased the opacity. For the pink tree on the left of the house, I used the built-in Photoshop tree renderer. I generated a Sakura cherry blossom with an increased leaves amount, leaf size, and I set the light direction to around 130 to match the light source. I scaled it down and masked out the bottom part of the trunk to fit it in the grass. So I duplicated the whole thing, moved it down a bit and masked out the sharp bottom edge with a soft brush. Then a curve adjustment layer to add a bit more contrast. Then I placed it behind the house to give it some depth. More the same for this tree over here. I just had to decrease the leaf amount to 0 to get rid of them, then messed around with the branch height and thickness to get the one big branch on the side to add a swing onto. Then a gradient map and curves. For the swing, I cut it out, placed it under the big branch of the tree, added a gradient map and curves. But since it looked way too thin when zoomed out to the point where it was barely visible, I duplicated it a few times and gave them a slight offset. At this point we're done with the central aisle, but I thought those mountains were a bit lonely, so I added a tree and a waterfall on the left mountain and a little barrel-shaped house on the right mountain. For the tree, I used the same technique as before, added the curves and a gradient map. But it still didn't look right, so with a big soft brush, I painted over the left side of it with a dark shade of blue, then decreased the opacity of the layer and set it to multiply blending mode. Whereas I painted a whitish orange on the right and set the layer to lighten blending mode. And finally, color balance. For the waterfall, I cut out the image, and after some very careful and meticulous warping and masking, I got to look somewhat like it was in between the layers of rocks forming the mountain. Then I used camera to make it a touch warmer, bring down exposure, contrast and highlights, and bring up considerably both texture and clarity. Then Gaussian blur of 1 pixel to make it seem like it was not as close and detailed. Then curves, and a light blue soft brush stroke over it to crush some more of the highlights. Then finally, some haze, which as I did before, I duplicated the layer, dehazed it in camera, masked it out, and painted some back in. And on top of that, I also painted some more in manually. Now, moving on to the right side, I applied the same grass fill I used for the floating island, and dimmed it a bit with curves. Then, I added the barrel, which required some patching to cover the engraved logo and the tab, which was done using the clone stamp tool and the spot healing brush tool. Then for the door, it's actually the door from Bagan from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, which I masked out, scaled to fit the barrel, and then I used curves to give the impression of depth by painting some of the effect around the door. Finally, a gradient mask to desaturate it and match the barrel. Then I added a glowing window, for which I just copied the other one I made for the other house. But since I felt like there was too much detachment from the floor of the house and the grass beneath it, I added a doorstep, for which I created the base shape with a rectangular lasso tool and filled it with a wood texture. To top it all off, I added a chimney, which is actually from a normal brick house, but since it's gonna be very small even when zoomed out, I just added a gradient map and called it a day. Now to color grade the barrel house, I added curves, a gradient map, more curves, and this random blue highlight, which I painted it for no apparent reason whatsoever, other than it looks cool, I guess. But well, it's a fantasy composition anyway, right? But I digress. Then I added a bit of smoke, like if a fireplace inside a barrel-shaped wooden house wouldn't burn it all down, but then again, we have a blue highlight for no reason. And now it's finally time to start finalizing the grading. So curves first, then color balance, then the warming filter LUT, and a gradient map. Then a gradient map, vignette, a vertical gradient to darken the lower part of the image slightly, finally a touch more vignette and some highlights in the center of the image to really make the floating island pop. And finally, the good old camera raw filter, and a couple of filters from the filter gallery, and a diffuse glow to make the highlights pop, and a cutout to add a bit more of a rough feel. Both hardly noticeable, but I think they enhance the dreamlike feel of the image, which I really like and was what I was going for with this edit. Here's a flowchart of all my camera raw settings. Nothing special really, mainly just small tweaks, some split toning, but that's it. So this wraps it, but before you go, let me know if this style of video is something you like and would like to see more of in the future. And if there is some edit over on my Instagram page which you'd like to see me break down, let me know down in the comments. Anyway, thanks for watching, drop a like, and if you feel like being awesome, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any future uploads. Or maybe check out my Instagram page at _thedreamwalker. Anyway, that's been it, see you next time.